So this continues our kind of UAS basics lecture here, and we're going to start talking about batteries in this video. Hopefully you've watched other videos already about transmitters and receivers. This one's going to speak specifically to batteries and the type of batteries we use in the world of UAS, at least small UAS, right? Okay, so up here on the screen we have a photograph of a battery, and I have some batteries here I'm going to pull up on the dot cam or cameras to try to show you guys as well. So when we see one of these batteries, which you may have seen before, you might recognize some things, you might not recognize some things. Let's look at the dot cam and let's see what we can see on a physical battery. So I got a couple different cameras here. I'm not sure how helpful this will be. I'm going to try to show you a couple different ways here and see if we can see this as best we can. Okay. So I'm looking at a battery basically like this in terms of what we're looking at on the dot cam. Physically, the battery is you know, this one's about the size of my hand and has a couple cables coming off it. It's basically rectangular and got some numbers and letters and stuff on the front. So we're going to look at those a little bit here right now. Let me make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay. So here on our camera, I'm going to try to get rid of that glare. Let's see if we can angle the camera a little bit better. Have to tilt the battery. Sorry, guys. So on the battery here, we see there's a couple different numbers and kind of basically specifications for the battery. This one says 5.0 right here. Okay. If you look really close down here, it actually has a little thing that says voltage. Okay. And the voltage here is marked. This says 6 cell 22.2. Okay. And then also over here we see a 40 to 50 discharge, or 40 to 50 C discharge, and we see a 5,000 milliamp hour right there as well. So what we're seeing, all these different specifications and numbers and things, we don't know what they mean yet, and that's okay. We can identify some of these and we'll talk about each one in turn. All right. We also see a little bit more in depth here. This is an adapter, so let's take that off real quick. We have a set of wires here, multiple wires in one connector, right? And then here we have a black and red wire. You might be able to guess that's positive and negative for the main battery connection here. So most LiPo batteries are, basically set up this way. Let me show you a couple other ones here. So we have this larger one here. We have a slightly smaller one. Well, I guess maybe a little more slightly smaller. Those two there. Got a littler one, even smaller one here. Lots of different kinds of batteries. You can see out there different sizes, and basically those specifications differ between the different batteries. So hopefully that makes sense. So now if we're going to kind of focus on some of these specs and parts of the batteries, let's look at this blue one, for example. I'm going to put it back up here. We're going to bring this back up larger. Sorry, just a second. There we go. Okay, so on this battery here, we have many of the same things we observed on the other battery that we were looking at a minute ago. Okay. We have the large 1.4. Let me get something to point with here. We have this large 1.4. See if I can brighten this up a little bit. There, that's a little better. 1.4 right here. Okay. We have a 1400 here. We have a 3 cell, right? And just gives us 3 cell as the label, as opposed to this one, which actually had a label that could be used for more than one type of battery, I suppose, and they just marked which one it was. This one just says, hey, right off the bat, 3 cell, 11.1. Okay, then we have a discharge, higher discharge right here, and it says 40 to 50 C. You can see that discharge right there. Okay. So what do all these numbers and symbols and things mean, right? Okay, if you're familiar with electricity in general, which some of you may be, there's volts and amps and watts and all that kind of stuff, right? So batteries have to do with that. And different batteries have different specifications, okay? So let's start over here with the voltage for the battery. Now voltage is kind of like electrical pressure, we'll say. So if you were to use the analogy, it's often used with electricity where you're talking about water coming down a pipe, okay? The amount of pressure in that pipe is kind of like the voltage, okay? So the higher the voltage, the more pressure that's going to push out of this connector into whatever you plug it into, okay? So in this case, this is this 3 cell battery. The voltage, kind of we'll call it the nominal voltage, 11.1 volts, right? Now LiPo batteries are a little bit different than like AA batteries and things like that. They're happiest at kind of a halfway charge, or about a 60% charge. Okay, if you keep them fully charged for a long time or discharge them and leave them discharged for a long time, the battery will get damaged. So 11.1 is kind of what they call a nominal voltage. Some people will store their batteries at 11.1. Some people store them a little bit higher. It just depends on who you are and your personal preference a little bit. I'm not aware of any large industry practices regarding that. But this voltage here is what you'll often see on the battery itself. Okay, and that's what's called the nominal voltage. So that's how much pressure we'll say is going to try to come out of the plug once we plug it into something. So we see here we have a 3-cell battery, right? 11.1. If we look closer at this one, it says 6-cell. It'll focus on that. There we go. 22.2 volts. So much more pressure in this battery than this smaller one. Okay. And basically because the voltage is higher. Now, why is the voltage higher? Because there are more cells in this battery than there are in this battery. Okay. So we'll talk about cell count a little bit more here in a second, but basically that's the battery voltage. Okay. And so if we go back to this one here, we have a 3-cell, 11.1 volts. Now, one other thing that's tied to that cell count and that voltage on the battery is actually this smaller connector here. Okay. When we talk about the cells and how they're wired in a second, this might make more sense, but just to tie it in right now, we have this connector here, and this connector has 4 individual wires. Okay. And we have basically one wire for each cell and then a wire for ground. So on what's called a balanced connector, which is this one here, a balanced connector will have the number of cells in the battery plus one more wire for ground on any lithium polymer battery. Okay, so you can see this one here from our large battery. It's going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wires. That's because it's a 6-cell battery plus the ground wire. So if you were to find a battery laying around or something that didn't have a label on it, but it had a connector like this, you could count it, and if you knew it was a LiPo battery, then you could determine how many cells were in that battery. Again, this is called the balance connector, or sometimes the balance tap. Yeah. Okay, a couple other batteries here. This is also a 3-cell battery, different colors on the wires, but we have, again, 4 wires there. Okay, and this one is actually a 4-cell battery. So you can see down here it says 4S. I'll explain that more in a second, but it's a 4-cell battery. And so we have 5 wires. 4 black wires there and 1 red wire. Okay. So that's kind of the first spec here we have is the cell count and the voltage of the battery. Right. Sorry, my camera's having trouble focusing again. There we go. Okay. We'll come back to kind of a little diagram where we draw the cells out here in a second.